Good afternoon. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and our Lewis Lehrman Auditorium. We, of course, welcome those who join us on our heritage.org website on all of these occasions. For our in-house guests, we would ask that courtesy to see that our mobile devices have been silenced or turned off as we prepare to begin. And of course, for those watching online, you're welcome to send questions or comments at any time, simply emailing speaker@heritage.org, and hopefully I'll keep my voice. Introducing our program and hosting our event today is Emily Gao. She is director of our Richard and Helen DeVos Center for Religion and Civil Society. She is an attorney who has defended religious freedom for the last 14 years. She has worked on behalf of victims of religious freedom violations in East Asia, the Middle East, Europe, and South Asia at the State Department's Office of International Religious Freedom, as well as Beckett Law. She previously worked at the United Nations and Lanham & Watkins, and she has also taught international human rights law at George Mason University's Law School as an adjunct professor of law. Please join me in welcoming Emily Gao. Emily?
Welcome and thank you all for coming. There are times when Americans who hold different viewpoints should come together to protect the most vulnerable in our society, and this is one of those times. Today, almost 440,000 children are in foster care. 100,000 of them are awaiting adoption. This number was shrinking for the last decade, but now it's rising due to the drug crisis. In 2016, the Department of Health and Human Services reported that 92,000 children were in foster care because of the drug crisis. It is the #1 driver of children into foster care today. With 100 Americans dying each day due to drug overdoses, we face not just a public health emergency, but also a foster care emergency. For a child in foster care, an adoption agency represents a lifeline to a stable and loving family who can provide them with a permanent home. And for a birth mother who's facing an unplanned pregnancy, an adoption agency provides a lifeline to the family that she dreams of for her child. And for the parents who adopt a child, that adoption agency provides a connection to the child and also supports them as they raise that child. But now, the left is seeking to cut these lifelines that faith-based adoption agencies represent. They have filed lawsuits in Michigan by the American Civil Liberties Union, in Texas by Lambda Legal. They seek to overturn state-level protections of faith-based adoption agencies because they follow their belief that every child deserves both a mother and a father. In DC, Massachusetts, and California, these activists succeeded in shutting down Catholic charities. In Illinois, when this happened, over 2,000 children were displaced. Now, the Congress is considering a bill, the Child Welfare Provider Inclusion Act, which would protect faith-based agencies and allow them to operate according to their beliefs. Representative Mike Kelly has introduced H.R. 1881 in the House, and Senator Mike Enzi has introduced S. 811 in the Senate. At this time, when so many children are in need of homes, the American people should be ensuring that as many lifelines exist and can continue to operate for these children. At this time, it is important that we protect these agencies to keep kids first. Now I'd like to introduce you to our distinguished panelists for today. At the far end of the stage is Chuck Johnson. He is the president and CEO of the National Council for Adoption. He is an advocate for children, birth parents, and adoptive families, and he's a frequent commentator on adoption policy and practice. Prior to joining the NCFA, Chuck served for 17 years with a licensed child placing agency in Alabama and was its executive director for 8 years. Chuck is a graduate of Auburn University with a degree in social work, and he holds a master's degree from Birmingham Theological Seminary. Chuck and his wife are adoptive parents. Next is Ryan Bomberger. Ryan is a leader in the pro-life movement. He is the founder and chief creative officer of the Radiance Foundation, a life-affirming 501c3. Ryan is also an Emmy Award-winning creative professional, broadcast media designer, producer, newspaper columnist, and author of the powerful new book, Not Equal: Civil Rights Gone Wrong. Ryan earned his master's in communication from Regent University, and he is an adopted son and a father through adoption. Kelly Clemente is a teacher, a grief workshop facilitator, and a birth mom support group leader. She graduated from Regent University with a master's in school counseling. Kelly is a birth mother who placed her son with his family through Bethany Christian Services, and she has also gained a sister through adoption. And now we will watch a short video that will introduce you to Kelly's story. This video was made by our colleague Kelsey Harkness on the Daily Signal, and you can share this video on Facebook and Twitter.
I had this identity built up for myself, and it was shattered when I found out I was pregnant. And then I was holding on to a relationship that was shattered. I walked out to my parents' driveway, to the road outside of their house, and I am 8 months pregnant. I laid down on the road, and I'm just laying there, and I'm saying, I hope a car comes. I just hope a car comes. I can't do this anymore. I want to die. I can't handle this. This is too much for me. And for the first time in my entire life, I heard a very still small voice that I had never heard. And that still small voice said, "Get up. I'm not done with you yet." And I was like, well, that wasn't for me, because I'm definitely done. I'm done with me. I'm definitely done with me. I got up and I said, okay, I know that this sweet baby did nothing wrong, so I don't want him to get hurt. So I'm gonna have this baby, and then I'm gonna take my life, because I was so broken and I didn't think there was any meaning left. The voice said, no. I said, I'm not done with you yet. And at that moment, I knew that I was loved by a really big God who had a really big heart, that didn't judge me for my pregnancy and still loved me so much. So I pulled myself together. I went to that hospital after my water broke. My parents came with me. My sister was there. And after a very short, very painful labor, I gave birth to the sweetest, healthiest, most wonderful boy. So I had this many different handwritten notes planned, and I'm going to be honest with you. I'm just going to speak from my heart, because the story is my life, and it's not just a policy that I'm trying to push. It's not a political belief that I'm here today to really talk to you about. I'm here because adoption changed my entire life, not just because I was pregnant, but because there was a courageous woman that had a child and chose my family to raise that child. And I'm going to be honest, I was not nice to that woman, thinking about that woman. I thought that adoption was a wonderful thing, but I thought that birth moms were heartless and evil. to be able to have a child, to walk 9 months through a pregnancy, and to be able to walk away from that child. What type of person does that? So I know that some people watching this are looking at me and saying, wow, what type of person does that? Well, I did. I made that choice. And I made that choice out of love. I made that choice because I wanted a mother and a father to raise my unborn child. I didn't know a lot at the time. Everything was chaotic and loud and overwhelming. I was at the lowest point of my life. I was supposed to be a fun sorority girl whose hardest part of her college experience was getting an A in calculus. This wasn't in my plan. This didn't fit in to my plan. This wasn't who I was. My identity was a lot of things, but birth mother was not anything that I had planned for my life. At this time in my life, when everything was completely out of control, I knew that I had power over one thing, and that was who's gonna have my little treasure that's growing inside of me. I couldn't change the fact that I didn't have a home, that I didn't have a job, that I didn't have an education, that I didn't have a husband. I could not change any of that, but what I could change or choose was the family that would raise my child. And honestly, I didn't choose Bethany because it was a faith-based organization. I chose Bethany because it was the first thing that popped up on Google. And I remember being in the car with my best friend, and it clicked for me that, oh, this Bethany Adoption Agency, Bethany Christian Adoption? Oh, this is a Christian adoption agency. Oh, the judgment is gonna be so real, because I expected to be treated by the women at that adoption agency the way that I had treated my sister's birth mother. And I walked in expecting the wrath of God to be on me, eye rolls. And I thought that's what I deserved. Because not only had I had sex outside of marriage, which I knew was wrong, I knew right from wrong. I was raised in a Christian family. I knew that what I did was wrong. And not only that, but I had treated someone in my situation with such disgrace that I knew that I deserved nothing good in my life at this time. I was met with love by Bethany social worker, and I use the word love because she was patient with me, she was kind with me, she kept zero record of my wrongs. And I hadn't even read that verse in Colossians at that point in my life. I just knew that there was a woman that wasn't pushing an agenda on me. She just wanted to hear my story. She never shoved religion down my throat. She never made me feel bad for what I did. She was the first person that saw me and heard me and made me feel like maybe there was light at the end of this tunnel that I was trapped in. And Stacy was amazing. She walked me through the hardest time in my life. When I think back at that time in my life, I see a lot of darkness and this ray of sunshine, which was this social worker that was there for me. And I just remember feeling like God was so angry with me. And a wise woman once told me that it doesn't really matter what you say to people. What matters is how you made them feel. And I don't remember specifics of what was said to me at Bethany. I just remember leaving that first day feeling lighter. Like this burden that I was carrying wasn't just mine, it was being shared with someone else. I know now that she was taking that burden and leaving it at the foot of the cross of Jesus. But I didn't know that back then. I was just like, wow, this is a really cool Christian. She's being really nice to me. So anyway, you have been let into a little piece of my world, a small part of my world, but the most impactful part of my life. And I just want you to hear me when I say that it's not fair to take away a birth mother's right to a faith-based agency because these women don't just have a physical problem. Some of these women are at their weakest moment spiritually, and they are spiritually dying. And if you cannot provide them with spiritual hope, which in my mind, that is the only real type of hope that there is. Jesus is hope for me. And if you take Christ out of that conversation in those rooms with these women that are at their lowest point, like I was, if you take Christ out of the conversation, you are doing them a disservice. And I feel really blessed that I was able to go through Bethany. I feel blessed that I had Stacy to look me in the eyes when I told her that God hated me, and she said, no, he does not. He loves you. And that day when I wanted a car to run me over, even though she had told me that this God loved me, I didn't feel it until he told me to get up. And he told me that I'm not done with you yet. And if you're in this room, he's not done with you yet either. I do want to introduce you guys to someone that came here today. Yesterday, I had a surprise visit from two people in my life that are very important to me. And they are my birth son, Alex, and my adoptive, I don't even know what to call you. You're my best friend. You're like the best person in my life, Sean. And they're sitting right here. They're right here. Bethany gave me the opportunity to meet Sean and her husband Dave, and she was a role model for me 10 years ago, and she's a role model for me now. When I look at Alex and I look at you, Sean, there's no doubt that I made the right decision, and I'd make it again and again and again.
Thank you, Kelly. Ryan, please go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you, Kelly, for wrecking me. That's great. Oh, I'm supposed to get complete sentences out. That's beautiful. Well, I have some things to show you on the screen here, because it's one thing to tell you about my background, but I think you just kind of need to see the visuals. I just need to gather myself here. See, your birth mom strong. That's what I love.
Hashtag birth mom strong.
There you are. You really are. Adoption is not an easy thing. The adoption happens because the natural order of things is broken. So in the supernatural and in the natural, adoption restores what was broken. And tangible result of that, this is little me at the age of 2. My wife and I started the Radiance Foundation, and part of it's based on my own adoption story. I'm a former board member of Bethany Christian Services there in Hampton Roads. I'm also, as I mentioned, a graduate of Regina University, and I've been passionate about adoption since day one. People ask me, why am I pro-life and why am I pro-adoption? I don't know, when you grow up a family of 15 with 12 other siblings, that would probably explain why you're a little passionate about this. So the question is asked, well, why a faith-based agency? So when I was the first one to adopt in our family, my parents had, in fact, these are the original Bombergers, the 3 homemade ones, I guess. So it was a family of 5, and my parents had a heart for adoption. It actually started with my mom, who was placed in a children's home for 1 year when she was 5 years old. She had an alcoholic father. Her parents were separating, so for a year's time, she lived in a children's home. And she just remembers just watching another little girl who was at the home who had some physical disabilities, who was never visited. At least my mom was visited separately by her parents. But no one visited this little girl, and it's amazing because we underestimate how much a young child receives and perceives, and yet this 5-year-old girl, my mom, was so impacted by the fact that this little girl was never visited by anyone, and she just remembers getting down on her knees, and she just said, God, help me be a mommy to those who don't have one. And my dad obviously had to share that same heart, because if you're gonna adopt 10 children, you have to be on the same wavelength, but that's where the heart of adoption started. But why a faith-based agency? Well, it was faith-based agencies that were actually defying some of the decrees of social workers, particularly the National Association of Black Social Workers, that decreed in the early 70s that a black child should never be placed in a white home for any reason. So you had a lot of black children and biracial children like me who were languishing in foster care simply because of, well, a very racist sort of mentality. No black child who's languishing in foster care is going to say, you know what, I'm going to hold out for another 1.5 years for someone who has the same pigmentation. No one would ever say that. They want to be loved, and they certainly want to be loved by mom and a dad. And we were loved by mom and a dad. And all this stems, too, out of James 1:27, pure religion is this, taking care of widows and the orphans. That's why Christians are compelled. That's why Christians are moved to adoption. It is the essence of salvation. There's no salvation without it. So it should be a first nature thing for us. But this is the first moment that my mom was able to hold me. I was 6 weeks old, and it apparently came with the largest passy ring you've ever seen. So I'm pretty sure you just slip your forearm in there and swing the child to sleep. I don't know. But this moment, by the way, adoption unleashes purpose, but also self-sacrifice. Like self-sacrifice that you had to commit to. The self-sacrifice that adoptive parents have to commit to, that also unleashes purpose. We understand in the eternal sense, there is no, afterlife. There is no salvation without the self-sacrifice. My mom, her alcoholic father, although her parents divorced later in life, she still tried to have a relationship with her father, and she thought, oh, maybe he would be drawn in because maybe he would support us in adopting this cute little brown guy here. And she knew that he was a flawed man. He was a very broken man, but she didn't realize he was also racist. And so when she talked about this idea of bringing a black child into their home, and her father wanted nothing to do with it, especially since there's a adorable little boy here in the front, I'll keep it rated G, but he just said, if you bring that black child into your home, you're basically gonna ruin your family. He didn't want nothing to do with the family. In fact, he pretty much separated, never saw him. He missed out on 13 amazing grandchildren. So my mother literally had to lose a father in order to gain a son. And so that was the first adoption. Okay, first hurdle over. I'm just glad she chose well. She chose me. So thank you, Mom. But also, adoption restores what is broken, but it also reminds us of what is needed. I needed my mom. I needed my dad. My dad is the most amazing man in my life. Taught me about faith, taught me about loving God, which naturally means you love people. And my dad was an amazing man. He somehow had enough time to commit to all of these kids. He would spend one-on-one time. I mean, having 13, has anyone in this room raised 13 teenagers? I'm just wondering. Raising 13 teenagers is not easy. Raising one teenager can almost kill you, I'm just saying. But my parents stuck in there. My dad is the biggest influence in my life. I I love them like crazy. And so the adoption started. I was the first one, and obviously it went well. So they kept bringing in a new flavor every year into the family. And so this is when we were a small family of 8. But I love the title of this news article. My parents didn't do many interviews at all. They're shy people, amazing shy people. But I love the title. It says, quote, "Unwanted children," unquote, "find their wanted." There's no such thing as unwanted. Some of us may have been unwanted by a biological parent or biological parents, but we're all wanted by someone. And so faith-based agencies understand this. They don't write off a child as unwanted. They know that there's someone out there who will love them, and that's why they try to place them in amazing homes like this. In fact, our family wouldn't even be what it is without a faith-based agency. If it weren't for the faith-based agencies that my parents went through, we wouldn't look the way we look at all. In fact, we kind of look a little different. This is all of us. These are all my siblings, all 13 Bomber kids. You can tell we're slightly different looking. We're white and we're black, we're biracial, we're Native American, Vietnamese. 2 of my brothers are black albinos. Some of us have physical disabilities, some have learning disabilities. But everyone in this picture, and faith-based agencies understand this, everyone in this picture has special needs. And that is to love and to be loved. And we were all loved like crazy. I'm the one in the middle, kind of with a little checkered shirt there. I was the favorite in the family. Come on, some of you know that feeling, right? But we were all loved like crazy. But here's the thing. Transracial adoption for me, and growing up in this family of diversity, I appreciate diversity, but I actually appreciate commonality even more. It wasn't race or ethnicity that tied us together. It wasn't culture that tied us together. It was love that bound us together. And so that's why this is one of the tenets of the Radiance Foundation, that we are one human race. And this is what I grew up understanding, growing up in a family with people from so many different backgrounds. But this is where I challenge this concept that somehow there is discrimination against a community today, the LGBT community, that is akin to the discrimination that Black individuals experienced in the Civil Rights Movement. When you have one of the lead researchers, Lisa Diamond, who was a professor of psychology and gender studies at the University of Utah, saying that gender identity is fluid and that sexual orientation is not fixed, it's not innate. Well, how then do you compare that to this? Because this is innate. This doesn't change. There's no pigmentation fluidity, unless I'm out in the sun a little bit more and then I change a little bit, but there is no fluidity there. So there really is no comparison. There's certainly no comparison. The discrimination of Blacks who had to, LGBT individuals were never enslaved. They never had to deal with separate and unequal. They never had to deal with taking poll taxes, literacy tests, didn't have their houses firebombed, weren't lynched by the KKK. Were not subjected to discrimination. Now, discrimination today, I almost have to put it in quotes because it means something completely different. But there is no comparison. In transracial adoption, there was a lot of real discrimination where, especially that was supported by the National Association of Black Social Workers, to say that somehow white parents couldn't love a Black child, and that a Black child didn't deserve to be loved by white parents. I'm just glad that my parents defied that, and I'm glad that faith-based agency defied that. And I want to show you a picture of now what all of this looks like, defying the world's low expectations. This is my whole family. Just my brothers, my sisters, their spouses, their children. There are about 63 in this picture, and there are 5 more added now, a few added through adoption. But this is what it looks like when you defy the world's low expectations, when you care for the least of these, when love is at the center of it. And I don't have enough time to go into all the stories of transformations, but my siblings, a number of my siblings, 10 of us are adopted, and a number of them came from incredibly broken backgrounds, sexual abuse, physical abuse. But yet, there was a mom and a dad who poured themselves into all of our lives and enabled us to be who we are. This picture is actually made possible because of women like you, Kelly. That's why sitting next to you, I'm trying not to lose it here. But it's one of the memes that I created, and I really mean it. I've never met my birth mom. So when I do get to interact with birth moms, I just see the incredible resilience and courage in you, and I'm very grateful and thankful because you proved that you were stronger than your circumstances. You could have chosen a much easier route, at least it might have seemed easier at the time. this picture of my family, you know, all 15 Bonbergers and now however many there are, 90, are possible because of birth moms like you. I never met my birth mom. So as a creative, I try to figure out, how do I thank my birth mom? How do I say thank you for choosing the plan of adoption, for choosing the family that you did? She had that ability to choose who would take care of her son, me. And so as a creative, I try to figure out, how do I thank my birth mom? So I created this tribute, and I laid out the things that I've been able to become in my life by the grace of God, all because of my birth mom's singular decision. And this is my little tribute to her.
Now it's your turn to wreck me. Oh.
So because of birth moms like Kelly, I'm here. I'm able to love and to be loved. And I know what it's like to be truly discriminated against. I'm that 1% that's used 100% of the time to justify abortion. That's true discrimination, where those around us would say that someone like me should have been aborted. But instead, I had a birth mom who chose life, gave me the incredible gift of adoption, and gave me the best gift of my life, which are these people right here. It's my wife and my 4 kiddos, 2 of whom were adopted. My youngest son, Justice, my daughter, Haley Radiance, the reason for the name of our organization, because my wife was a single mom for 2 years and chose life. Thank goodness, Haley Radiance beautifully and radically transformed her life. And my 2 middle children who are competing for middle child status, Makai and Aaliyah. But they're the beautiful reverberations of a birth mom choosing strength. And that's why I'm here today, and that's why I will defend faith-based agencies who make lives like mine and families like mine possible.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Now, Chuck.
Well, thanks to Ryan and Kelly for sharing their story. I'm the policy wonk representing a non-sectarian agency discussing these faith-based issues. But I am glad to be here, and thank you, Emily, for having us. I am more nervous about inserting National Council for Adoption into this discussion than really any area I think that we've gotten involved in. I'm going to stick very closely to my notes. I'm not going to try to wing this, so please bear with me. I don't want to take a position for National Council for Adoption where we don't have one. I also have really preferred my advocacy to be focused, child-focused advocacy, rather than on the grown-ups in adoption and foster care, and even organizations like Adoption Service or foster care agencies. Yet you can see there's a clear connection between the things that we're talking about and the discussions and the debates that are happening all around the country. Although I have a personal opinion about these topics today, I'm very mindful that National Council for Adoption represents public agencies, we represent private secular agencies, and we also represent faith-based agencies. And I just wouldn't want anything that I would say today to be a poor reflection on them. National Council for Adoption does not take a simple for or against position regarding who should be eligible to adopt, except to say that foster and adoptive parents should be qualified, they should be vetted, they should receive pre and post education and training, and they should be fully supported during the foster care process and after an adoption, should one take place. We try to avoid really the whole conversation about who should adopt, because we have concluded accurately there is no right to adopt in America. And once you start talking about this group adopting or this group not adopting, you really take the focus off children and you begin the focus on the grown-ups and agencies and organizations. And so there is no right to adopt, only the right of a child to have a loving family. And because so much of what we do, and we do engage in the foster care issue as it relates to the 118,000 children waiting to be adopted, too much of adoption's history is focused on adoptive families and their right to adopt or getting the right child to a family. The adoption was about families getting the child they wanted as opposed to the child getting the very best family. And so that's been a shift in recent generations, and I just don't want to go back to debating the right to adopt. And I think that's common ground. I think that's something that we can, whatever your perspective is, we can come together on that. And so I want to make two what I consider irrefutable and very objective statements that may offend people in the room, whatever your position is, and listening online, whether you support the right of foster parenting and adoption by the LGBT community and you want to ensure that there's no discrimination taking place, or you support the right of faith-based providers who, for religious or scriptural reasons, believe that they cannot work with certain populations of grown-ups without violating long-held religious beliefs. So the first statement I would just make, and Emily alluded to this earlier, the reality is there are 437,465 children estimated to be in foster care, at least in 2016 there were. That's an increase from 2012 of 10%. That number is growing. If we were to measure that number today, it would be higher because of the opioid epidemic that's sweeping the country. If we were to take it today, the number would be much higher. Almost every day I see reports. In fact, I looked this morning, I get a list of news, and there were 2 references within states of the opioid epidemic, really placing a burden on foster care systems all over the country. As children are being removed from parents who are suffering from addiction, unable to care for their children, they're being removed from those families and placed in foster care. Some of them will end up being adopted. Some of them will return to their families when they're ready. There's also 118,000 children waiting to be adopted from foster care right now. So there are 437,000 or more in foster care. 118,000 of those are waiting to be adopted. That's a 14% increase over the same period from 2012. And that's despite a 10% increase in the number of adoptions that are happening out of foster care. And so one of the really objective facts I just would throw into this as people are forming their positions, taking positions and debating the issue, is that many of these families who are adopting and fostering in foster care are from the LGBT community. And if you eliminate the LGBT community from fostering or adopting, then it will mean that the already burdened foster care system, unless you have some other solution, the already burdened foster care system will have fewer resources for children, and children will go unadopted. And I just can't imagine anyone would be okay with that. The second statement, I said I'm an equal offender here, is that faith-based agencies are without question providing a very important service in the world of foster care and adoption. To deny their contribution would be very dishonest and disingenuous. I know many people who work in these agencies, and they are very passionate about the work they do, very passionate about the children, the families they serve, and they work very hard and very effectively to serve the foster and adoptive families engaged in their programs. So to eliminate faith-based agencies from the field of service over ideology, to take away their licenses, which is happening in states, to prevent them from entering into contracts to provide these services with public entities, and that's happening. It's going to end up with the same result that we talked about previously, that you're going to see children, fewer resources for children in foster care, and children will go unadopted. And again, I can't imagine that we would be good with that when it's not necessary. So those are the facts, and I would argue that we can't allow ourselves to be distracted by ideology. Rather, I think we need to keep the focus on children and what's in the best interest of children. The truth is that foster and adoption by the LGBT community is happening in all 50 states. That's just a fact. It's happening. A parallel truth to that is that when faith-based agencies are allowed to continue to provide these services rather than being forced out, when they're allowed to continue, nothing's changed. Gay and lesbian families clearly have access to other providers because they're adopting and fostering in all 50 states. And faith-based agencies for generations have gone about their work providing foster and adoptive services to the populations that they've always served. So when we talk about changing something, it's when we talk about forcing faith-based agencies out of the arena of providing adoption and foster care services. And I'm just not sure how that's in anyone's best interest, the children, the grown-ups, anyone involved in this. And even better, and I think this really, to me, I think it's the point that we can really zero in on, is you have, if your position is to eliminate faith-based agencies from the field of service, my question is how does eliminating them improve foster or adoption services? If you can't answer that question, then I don't think we need to be having this conversation anymore. If you won't, it will not create more access for the LGBT community because they already have access. These families are not currently being denied the opportunity to foster and adopt. The exodus, however, of faith-based agencies from the field will cause chaos for the families that they work with and the children they serve, because somebody's going to have to step up and fill the void. And make no mistake, I believe that there will be a tremendous void that is being created in some states and will continue to be created. There's data that shows, and again, I'm just objectively stating the facts, there's data that shows that faith-based agencies in some instances are performing better services than the public agencies. In particular, there's a lot of data that shows that faith-based recruitment, church-targeted recruitment, has been a very successful solution for finding families who will not only step up and foster children, but we have research that is not published yet. We're a few years away from that, but we have research as we look at what motivates, why do 58% of the foster families quit the first year and another 20% quit the second year, and what is it about those that stay in the system? We're looking for criteria, and our preliminary research shows that people who feel called to foster and adopt are the most persevering foster families out there. It's just a fact, and you can't argue that. And one of the things, and as I wrap things up, I just want to point out that there's also research that shows that many of these families who are fostering because their faith has influenced them to enter this field. And just as many of those, and just as Kelly has articulated, it was very important for her, and it's very important for families to be able to work with an organization, a professional licensed organization that shares their convictions and beliefs, just as that there are other foster and adoptive families who would prefer working with a secular agency. Again, just the facts. And they have those choices in the way the system is working right now. In the current system, to my knowledge, there is no subset of foster adoptive parents that are being systematically denied or disenfranchised from fostering or adopting children. So whether it's public agencies, secular private agencies, or faith-based agencies, all are providing a very valuable contribution to the arena of services. The need for children to have more resources is growing, not decreasing. So in my opinion, it would be very reckless, cause long-term damage, and would not be in children's best interest to eliminate any quality provider. There's a role and a need for all service providers to remain engaged in serving the very diverse community. And that's something I think we have to recognize, is there's a diverse community of families and children out there. And we need a diverse set of agencies who can provide that. So I'm just back to this, the question that just occurred to me as I wrap things up is that if you're looking at or believe that it's appropriate to eliminate faith-based agencies from the field of service, you're going to have to answer the question that if it doesn't help more children find families, and if it's not in children's best interest, then I'm not even sure why we're having this conversation other than over ideological reasons. And I think we need to keep children first in this discussion. So those are my remarks.
Thank you, Chuck. I have a follow-up question for you, and then we will open it up to the audience for some questions. So the City of Philadelphia has just suspended the contracts of two faith-based agencies, Bethany and also Catholic Charities, because they have a policy of placing children with a mother and a father. We've talked a lot about the foster care system. Can you help us to understand what happens to an agency in a more holistic way? What will happen if the states adopt policies as they did in Illinois and Massachusetts that will penalize the agencies based on their religious beliefs about having a mom and a dad? What happens to the whole agency, and will the adoptions of infants, the domestic private adoptions, be affected as well?
Well, it can be, the latter part, because there are agencies in some states that have had to surrender their licenses unless they were willing to accept and work with people that did not fit their criteria. And just historically in the world of adoption, I should point out, is that there have always been agencies that, private agencies that set their own criteria for the families that adopted. Not always, sometimes it was religious criteria, other times it might be marital requirements, educational requirements, and other standards that they, in addition to what the state law permitted, they would add their own criteria. And so historically you've had agencies that served, you've had Jewish agencies that work with Jewish families and Catholic agencies that work with Catholic families, and you've had Protestant Christian agencies that have worked with those populations, including even denominations like Lutheran and Baptist, providing those services. And so when you talk about not just preventing, as happened in the city of Philadelphia, where Christian agencies were not allowed to partner and contract with the city of Philadelphia anymore, there have been some states that have even prevented and eliminated the agency from continuing their license. So they've lost their license. So they can't work with Kelly if she chooses to want to work with a faith-based agency or a family that wants to, a Christian family that wants to work with a faith-based agency. So that's happening, and it's of tremendous concern. But even in just the realm of foster care, I mean, if you look at some of the services that are being provided, if they're particularly like recruitment, are you going to stop an effective recruitment strategy? And if it's true, and I believe that it is, that the majority of these families, many of these families who are fostering children around the country are doing it for faith reasons, would you deny them the opportunity to have that kind of conversation that Kelly had with her counselor, as they talk about the struggles that they have? Or you're only allowed to provide a social work answer, a secular answer to encourage somebody? Or you're not allowed to say that there's hope in, you're a Christian and there's hope in Christ and there's forgiveness? I mean, are you not allowed to make those statements? Because that generally in a public agency, that would not be permitted. And so I think it just has very huge, serious consequences when we talk about this. And I just don't see it as, we've concluded, even though we don't take a position on the right to adopt, we don't take a position against LGBT families adopting. I just do not believe it would be in the long-term best interest of child welfare and children and birth parents and the families who are working with for adoption and for fostering to prevent them from having choice in this matter.
Thanks, Chuck. I have one question for Kelly and Ryan. So you've both been active in the pro-life movement, and I'd like to ask you if you see a connection between your work in the pro-life movement, giving women a choice of life, and also your work on adoption, having a diversity of providers for women to choose from.
Answer?
No, I'm just kidding.
You want to go?
I think that having a diversity of adoption agencies is incredibly important, because if, let's say that I was a carpenter and that was number one important thing in my life was like, if I have a child and I'm going to place this child for adoption, I need this child to be raised by 2 carpenters. I think that there should be an adoption agency for that. I mean, why not? I'm not a carpenter, I'm a Christian, and I wanted my son to be raised by 2 married Christians. So I think I took it a little bit too far with the carpenter comment, but I think the more adoption agencies, the better. The more choice for the birth mother, the better. We are the most marginalized group of this entire adoption triad, and to take away our voice and our right to be able to have support, because sure, there are women who don't have faith, that aren't interested in faith, that choose adoption for their child. However, the women that I've talked to, like I said before, this isn't just a physical experience or struggle that they're going through. This is an emotional battle. This is a spiritual battle. And for some women, I'm blessed that I get to have this open adoption with this boy with the sweetest face ever looking at me right now. It's gonna make me cry, but I'm lucky that I am able to have an open adoption. For some women, they have a closed adoption, and the only choice that woman gets to make for her child is who her child is raised by. And to take that decision away, or to not provide her with the support that she needs spiritually as she makes that decision, is an injustice.
I fully agree. The issue when it comes to the pro-life movement, I mean, you can't talk about abortion without talking about adoption. I mean, basically, it's like not finishing a sentence. You can't have the conversation. And this is what I find interesting, just putting things into context. The same groups that are trying to shut down these faith-based agencies, the same LGBT activists and organizations that are trying to shutter adoption agencies, are the same ones that try to shutter pregnancy centers, reducing choice for women who find themselves in unplanned pregnancies. So not only are they trying to rid the diversity of options when an unplanned pregnancy arises, they're also trying to rid the options when it comes to adoption, one of the only 2 alternatives to the violence of abortion. Lambda Legal ACLU, they're all radically pro-abortion. All the organizations that are supporting, or I'm sorry, that are fighting against the Child Welfare Provider Inclusion Act, I have to get that all together right. The ones that are opposing that are all LGBT organizations that are pro-abortion and proudly announce their solidarity with Planned Parenthood. And abortion, in my estimation, is the ultimate form of discrimination. It's actual discrimination. It's violent discrimination. So I think it's really important in the pro-life movement that we understand what's at stake here. Because when you're eliminating those who are actually leading and placing children, vulnerable children, in loving and stable homes, and those agencies are being threatened with closing, that eligible foster parents are being nixed because they don't affirm an ideology, it puts us in a dangerous place, and it's not keeping kids first.
Thank you, Ryan. We have time for a couple of questions from the audience. Please speak into the microphone that is circulating if you have a question, and please make sure it's a question. Thank you.
Hi, Dana Ritter with Christian Broadcasting Network, and I have two questions. The first is if you guys could give me, even if it's just an estimate, on the percentage of all of adoption agencies, how many would you say are faith-based? Or if I can get that somewhere.
We can actually make some it's really a complicated question because generally speaking, adoption is a state-based issue, and so and every state defines what is a licensed child placing agency, and so you have that issue. You also have organizations that are by charter faith-based, and then you have other private agencies that may be the leadership or they're Christian leaning, but not necessarily founded for that purpose. So it's really hard sometimes to define that. I know that in terms of our partners that we've worked with, and this was several years ago, but I think it's still a fairly accurate number, is I think that in terms of private adoption and intercountry adoption issues, that it's about 50-50, that about half of licensed child placing agencies have some faith claim, and then half do not. Now, when you talk about the foster care, public foster care, the majority of those services would be provided by public agencies, although in recent years you're seeing a growing public-private partnership to help try to find families to foster and to adopt these children. And again, some of those would be private secular agencies, and many of them, like Bethany Christian Services and others, would be decidedly Christian in their approach. And let's remember, there are agencies I know that serve Jewish families, and then there are agencies, I know of a while back, there was at least one agency that was serving Muslim families. And so, and people within that arena have, I guess, preferred to work with an agency that's like-minded. And that's the point I made earlier, is that if you don't fit religious criteria, or you're LGBT person and you have options. There's not, and even I've interviewed many faith-based agencies, and it's not as if you don't meet their criteria, they hang up on you and tell you to go away. These are agencies, I think, very sensitive about helping families get plugged into another resource. So even if they can't work with them, they're not abandoned, they're not hung up on, but they are referred to and connected to another organization that can work with them. And it's all done in a very professional manner as far as I know.
Thank you. And my second question is about exactly how the faith-based agencies would have to close up shop. Does it come down to licensing at the state level, or is there funding that's tied up with these kinds of things? If you could further explain that.
Well, it's happening several ways. Private agencies who provide these services, many states require that they be licensed child placing agencies, and so there have been states that have not even allowed private agencies to retain their state licenses unless they have a completely anti-discrimination policy across the board. And then you see examples of this in the contractual arrangements where public agencies, local state agencies are contracting with providers in their state, some of them secular, private, and other faith-based. And so in Philadelphia, for example, last month's decision was that those two agencies, their contracts were canceled because they would not work with LGBT families directly, although I think they had policies for referral. So if they recruited, if their recruitment efforts resulted in a person who did not meet their criteria, they recruited a family, they wouldn't allow that family to wither away, that they would make an appropriate referral so that another agency can work with them.
We have time for one more question.
I just want to thank all of you for this really incredible panel, and especially just you, Kelly, for your story. It's beautiful and powerful, and I should have worn more waterproof makeup because I've been crying the entire time. But I just wanted to specifically with, like, maybe if, Brian, you touched on this too, if both, either one of you have comments on this in terms of, I think the personal component is so powerful. And we're seeing this all over this country right now, especially in Kansas, is sort of close to my heart at the moment. They're trying to pass a bill that would protect faith-based agencies, allow them to stay in the field and continue to serve. And yet one of the main arguments we're hearing is that, and that they're trying to tell lawmakers, is that this law would actually not keep kids first. It would actually hurt the children. So as someone as both a birth mom, an adoptee, and an adoptive parent, you, Ryan, what would your response be to that? How would you respond to lawmakers and communicate that that isn't the case?
That's hard to hear that they would say that, you know, shutting the doors of faith-based agencies is the right thing to do for kids, because, you know, from the God that I serve, and He loved children. He put children first. And if Christ isn't at the center of adoption, then what is? And if children aren't at the center of adoption, then what is? I mean, birth mothers, you know, I don't want to speak for all of them, but I've never met a selfish birth mother. We were making this decision out of love. And but back to your comment, I can't imagine a world where a woman that is facing an unplanned pregnancy, her having to muffle her thoughts and her experiences that are spiritual related, or a social worker or a counselor having to muffle her encouragement, her spiritual encouragement in that room, this sacred space that these two people are sharing with each other, and coming up with a plan for a baby that's going to grow into a beautiful child like Alex. To take Christ out of the conversation to say that that is a good thing is unfair, and it muffles the voice of birth mothers, it muffles the voice of social workers and counselors that want to provide real hope and not some sugar-coated type of hope that comes through the secular world.
I think we have such an interesting idea of what discrimination is. Too many people think it's inherently evil. It's not. We discriminate all the time. We decide which clothing we're going to wear. We decide which food we're going to eat. And in adoption, it is inherently discriminatory because the goal is to find the best environment for the child, the best family for the child. So there is discrimination in that. So there's no way to have a fully anti-discrimination sort of framework, because it is discriminatory, because the whole point of adoption should be what is in the best interest of the child, what is best for him or her. And in this case, with these states trying to protect faith-based agencies, it is crucial for them to continue what they've been doing for decades and decades and decades. Where was the ACLU? Were they suing these faith-based agencies because they were somehow failing to some extent prior to the past few years when the LGBT ideological infusion into adoption became preeminent, and that's where we are right now. I just think it's tragic because in the end, okay, in the foster care system, for instance, there's 65,274 individual, beautiful children who are waiting to be adopted. That's in the last report from the Department of Health and Human Services. How are they being helped by eliminating more of the options? I mean, the whole point is to find more homes. The whole point is we're failing as a nation to rise up to this challenge of providing forever families for these children. And the attempt, the short-sighted, the short-sighted attempt by activist organizations to eliminate faith-based agencies is not keeping kids at the center of this. And so attempts in these states to protect faith-based agencies, I support them. And I would pray that certain politicians get a spine and support these faith-based agencies who have been operating for a long time out of their Christian calling, out of their faith-based calling, to do what they need to do to care for widows and orphans.
And I would just add to that is that one of the things that, again, as someone who's trying to approach this issue in an objective way, that characterization by proponents of LGBT adoption, it's really not accurate. Because as Ryan said, and as I said earlier, these are agencies that have never worked with these so you're not creating a new standard of discrimination all of a sudden that's legally protected, but you're just essentially recognizing the way the process has worked for generations. And so that characterization, again, is just to say that somehow we're creating something new. It's just not accurate.
Thanks to each one of you. I think you've each illustrated why it's so important for there to be the maximum number of choices for birth mothers, for adoptive parents, and that is the best way to keep kids first, is by including a diversity of agencies in the system. So to conclude, I just wanted to share a few more resources in case you're interested in learning more. So the entire 18-minute video of Kelly's story you can find on thedailysignal.com, and we encourage you to share that on social media. You can use the hashtag BirthMomStrong if you want. If you want to learn more about the impact of the drug crisis on foster care and the attacks on faith-based agencies from the left, you can look at heritage.org. That's our website, and we have several writings on that in the DeVos Center. And then finally, if you want to learn more about the Child Welfare Provider Inclusion Act, you can look at the website of heritageaction.com. Thank you all so much for participating in this discussion today, and please join me in thanking our panelists.